So next up, we have Laurie Smith-Kuypers. She is the Mitigation Division Outreach Specialist with FEMA Region 5. So thank you for being here, Laurie, and take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Fair warning, I'm a communications person. I'm not an engineer. So I always approach things from giving information to the public or to congressional staff and things like that. So I have been with FEMA in some communications respect for 12 years now, and started out with the map modernization program. Let's start on the first slide. Great. So we started the coastal flood hazard mapping program back around 2012, 2013. And this included all our coastlines, and FEMA decided to incorporate the Great Lakes. We did not have coastal V zones, as we call them, V as in vector, for waves higher than 3 feet in the Great Lakes, except in one spot up in Lake Superior, as far as I know. And so a lot of this feeds in from what John was talking about. And I think you'll see that of federal agencies, we all have specific missions and different authorities that we work from. And sometimes, a lot of times, we work together. And an example of that is that in doing these flood hazard maps that we call FIRMs, we use LIDAR from the Army Corps of Engineers, and we work with the with a lot of other federal agencies, including NOAA, to gather data and utilize the data that that they put out. Our authorities are from the National Flood Insurance Program, National Flood Insurance Act of 1968, and the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act of 1988. So that's where we get our money from. A lot of what we're doing with the flood hazard mapping is through the National Flood Insurance Program. And I think what I should point out here too is that when we're dealing with the National Flood Insurance Program, we're primarily concerned with damage to physical structures. And we're also concerned with building safely and strongly in areas that are prone to flood. So, you know, when we're talking about that, we don't get as technical because our mission is to prevent damage as much as possible, preserve life and provide safety and really encourage long-term mitigation, risk reduction to flood and other hazards. The identification and publication of flood hazards is just one leg of what we call the three-legged stool of the National Flood Insurance Program. The other supporting elements are floodplain management, in which local communities participate in the program and manage the floodplain, in other words, permit development in flood-prone areas, and flood insurance. And I'll talk a tiny bit to that later. Okay, next slide, please. And here I'm just gonna show you a video that FEMA created that you might wanna share with some of your stakeholders. Very simply done. It explains what would take me 25 minutes to explain in 2 minutes. So here we go.
Hey, sorry guys, it will be a little bit soft, but we'll do our best.
Thank you, Carolyn. So the Great Lakes, we mapped more than 3,000 miles of the Great Lakes. So Region 5, with its 6 states, there's eight Great Lakes states. Region 5 has 6 of them. So it's taken a lot of time. And if you go to the next slide, we also got a late start because the Great Lakes are a water system unto their own, and they don't really act like some of our coastal, like the East Coast and the Mid-Atlantic states and things like that. So our engineers had to work with the Army Corps of Engineers and University of North Carolina and some other contractors to develop methodologies that would work and enable us to have more accurate maps. So and what I want you to know, and I'll show later, is that the data is available for this. We basically use 3 different models to produce our maps and accurately simulate the wave actions. One of them is called Wave Height Analysis for Flood Insurance Studies, the WHAFIS. And that's for coastal, overland, and transect modeling. SWAN was used to identify the starting wave conditions and to work on transect modeling, because on the Great Lakes we did not have transect modeling before this project. And the final model that was used is called ADCIRC. It's Advanced Circulation Model is what it stands for, and that's to model nearshore and nearshore wave transformations and the overland wave propagation. And now, if you look at the this probably looks familiar, this diagram, because John was just talking about it. FEMA also took 150 storms from 1960 to 2009 so that they could crunch in and incorporate all the different lake levels over that period of time. And as you can see, I just put a couple arrows here just to compare. Like 1986, 87 is right in the center. And then 2009 ends where the orange begins, but you can see this past year is over here and we're way high again. The other thing that our engineers and contractors in creating these maps had to take into account was wave setup and run up and the overland propagation when dealing with different structures, different, like if the waves run over a beach, they run faster and farther. If they hit a bluff, Wisconsin and Michigan have a lot of bluffs. We saw a lot of work being done in the Chicagoland area and the North Shore and Northwest Indiana by the Army Corps of Engineers just this past summer. In fact, John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it was something in the area of $500 million to protect the shorelines because we were losing shoreline at an incredible rate. While we don't map that, we definitely were very interested in it and were brought into conversations, especially regarding, is this a possible declaration for the disaster? And there are reasons why a disaster declaration could not be done in the destruction of the land, mainly because a lot of the land is owned by the state or the federal government, and it's very few people in relation to a regular disaster were affected by what was happening. So I can, if you have questions later, I can go a little more into that. Let me see, am I missing anything else? I think that's it. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm leaving you with you'll get the slide deck. These are areas where you can get information about our flood hazard mapping, understanding that a lot of the information incorporated into these flood hazard maps is probably older than what you can get through some other areas, because it takes several years for these maps to become effective, partly due to the regulatory process and partly due to just the years and the appeals and the new information that comes along during the process of creating these maps. So they are just keep in mind as a caveat that the information may be older, but also know that these are the regulatory maps for development and flood insurance. That new information doesn't necessarily matter, even if 100 feet of shoreline disappeared, because that's what we're dealing with. And the local officials who adopt these maps have to do the permitting for any type of development or changes to the shoreline or to areas of the floodplain. So a lot of the Great Lakes maps and information about the Great Lakes, especially some of the methodologies that were used, are at the greatlakescoast.org. You'd think they would be on FEMA.gov, but they're not. They're they're housed in this area, and you can you can read about the analyses that were done, anything that went into these maps that's a little bit unusual. You can also access the preliminary maps, which we are through. We're just starting Lake Superior. We've done Erie, Huron, St. Clair, and we're in the process of doing Michigan. In fact, the maps in the southern part of Lake Michigan for Illinois and Northwest Indiana are due to come out next March or April if all goes well. Some people need to get information about environmental assessments and notices of intent to do any kind of even beach nourishment. So that information is here because FEMA does have a lot of sort of MOUs with a lot of the federal agencies. Our flood maps, our flood insurance information is here too. And if there's even in the the floodsmart.gov, if you are a stakeholder who has to communicate flood risk, there's a lot there to be had for communicating flood risk. All right, let's go to the next one. I'm almost done. For the techno nerds in the group, and I'm just teasing because I can get into being a techno nerd myself sometimes. This is where you get the actual studies, information and the analyses outside of what appears in the flood insurance study. So, and I just wanted to make there's a form that you fill out. This is here for you. I gave you direct links, so hopefully that'll make life a little bit easier. And we'll go to the next slide. Okay, and then I'm just going to go into a little bit about the other programs that we're working with that the flood maps affect. We have grant programs, two pre-disaster and one post-disaster. The pre-disaster is competitive. But we have a new program on the right called Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. And what's interesting about this is that it incentivizes public infrastructure projects and projects that mitigate risk to one or more what we call the lifelines. It also gives environmental aspects and environmental, say, stormwater, projects and things like that. It gives extra points. So if you go to the next slide, so there's information about the grant programs in our notes. I don't know if you're aware of the National Mitigation Strategy
I'm not sure if it turns off or what.
and the team. But we're working with over 20 federal agencies to try and pull all of our mitigation programs together and get them out there in a product. So, and that's a very tiny bit of what we're doing. And then here's some information about the National Flood Insurance Program that you may not have known, and who's involved and what happens. So I think that's about it. Does anyone have any questions?
Somewhere in there. It doesn't matter. Now try it with the other one that rub around your ear.
All right. Thanks, Laurie. We are getting
Tell
some
me who that is.
background noise. So if everyone could, again, just make sure that you are muted. But we did have a couple of questions and comments come in.
Who is it?
Okay. There's a phone ringing in the background, if that kind of helps to figure out where the noise is coming from. But anyways, Laurie, one of the comments that we had was just asking to please share the models that you identified.
Okay.
So maybe we can just put together a list, or we can talk about the best way to go about sharing that with the group. And then also, I do believe you answered this question, but just in case we need to reiterate, do you know when the new maps, such as for Cook County, will become effective?
So they will be, hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, because you never know what the regulatory process with appeals and how that all works out. But we're projecting in the spring of 2021. We did have last year, we had open houses and what they call community consultation meetings where people could come and see the maps. We had those in the north suburbs of Cook County.
Okay, thank you.
I will say on that, the Great Lakes Coast.org, they have all of the dates of all those meetings. They have the presentations that go into some of the details of the analyses. And there's a lot of information on that website. I can't stress enough that you should go and see that. It's an amazing website.
All right, and then Mark, who asked about the map, said, thank you. Will there be more outreach to communities regarding these new maps?
I guess, we've already done some outreach to communities, and I am happy to do any outreach if you feel there are communities that need more information. In this environment now, a lot of what we're doing is virtual, but we communicate, basically we bring our products to the local officials, and we invite people, the public, to these meetings that we've already had actually. And the local officials are responsible for actually putting out some information about when the maps are effective. However, if you need that and we can provide that, I'm happy to share it. Just let me know who needs it and we'll get it to them.
Perfect, thank you.